You see this little thing right here? This is my 3DS. My original model, non-XL, non-new 3DS. And I think I've logged more hours on this little thing than I have on just about any other system I own. I mean, I spent a good amount of my childhood on my Game Boy Color and my GBA, and much of my teen years were sunk into my DS. But man, something about the 3DS. You won't find a lot of other systems with the sheer volume of amazing, amazing games the 3DS boasts. I think a lot of it comes down to the hardware. The DS introduced true 3D gaming to the Nintendo line of handhelds, but 3D at that point was still pretty limited, and obviously a lot more expensive to produce than simpler stuff. Super Mario 64 DS and Metroid Prime Hunters and that over-the-hedge game that was like weirdly more technically impressive than any licensed game has any right to be were the exceptions. The vast majority of DS games kept things strictly 2D or used some 3D rendering without allowing like free movement in full 3D environments, that kind of thing. The 3DS though is when things started getting really interesting. It wouldn't be until the Switch's launch that the world would see Nintendo handheld gaming reach its true potential, but the 3DS was certainly a gigantic step forward. This was handheld gaming, but that much more engaging, that much more beautiful. I mean, people go on and on about how they want a big console-quality Pokemon game, but that's what X and Y and Sun and Moon are, man. They're the 3D Pokemon games we dreamed about in the late 90s. After the 3DS's shaky start, the system got tons of support from Nintendo and third parties both, and over the course of 6 years, it's built up one heck of an impressive library. There are 4 3DS games, though, that were too good to just happen once. In most cases, Nintendo likes to avoid oversaturation with their games. They might release a lot of games with Mario on the cover, for instance, but 3D Mario and 2D Mario and Mario and Luigi, as just a few examples, are very different and each individually take a good amount of time to release. Some franchises see more releases than others, but very few series see more than one title per system and release at a rate that people might consider too fast. I said few, not none. And I really appreciate that they do it that way. My video on Zelda's release schedule talks about all this a good amount. Click the card in the corner if you haven't seen it, and forgive me if I'm kind of retreading a bit here. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'm left wanting more. Sometimes a game is so good with so much room for expansion that it's a sin when we have to wait ages for a sequel. And if Nintendo's willing to take the time to build a game for a specific system, well, it seems silly not to use those assets just one more time. Just give us one more dose of goodness before tearing the whole thing down again for the next system, or 2 systems later. And I'm not saying that every game ever just has to get a sequel, but I feel these 4 games are perfect contenders. These 4 games were so good that I would have snatched up their sequels in a heartbeat. In no particular order, here they are. Super Mario 3D Land was the very first 3D Mario game developed exclusively for a handheld. If it has one really big flaw, it's that it's way too easy. I mean, baby's first Mario game levels of easy, at least for a good chunk of it. Even the 8 entire remixed special worlds meant to satisfy the true grown-up Mario fans once all the kids have beaten the main story and gone to bed, offer very little in the way of challenge. Power-ups are abundant, special coins just kind of sit in plain sight most of the time. The thing is though, this doesn't matter too much, at least not for me. Having a 3D Mario to play anywhere and everywhere is what's important, and in fact the low difficulty makes it easier to just sit down and veg out on. I'm bored. Maybe I'll go 100% Mario 3D Land for the 4th or 5th time. The presentation also does a lot to make the game go down smooth for hours on end. The music is nice, the graphics are nice, the 3D effect makes it look really stunning and helps loads with precise platforming. Super Mario 3D Land just gives me that constant laid-back level of happy that I mostly only get with Nintendo games. It's just pure digital pleasure every second I'm staring at the screen. Also, here's some Arlo trivia. It's the game that made me buy a 3DS. I was originally planning on waiting until the system had more games, but I played 3D Land at Best Buy, and I was just like, okay, I need this. This needs to be a thing that is happening in my hands and at my face right now. Nintendo crafted such a beautiful and satisfying handheld Mario experience that it seems ridiculous to me that they didn't give it a second go. I mean, the game sold like 10 million units. 3D Land 2 could have sold half that number and still been tremendously profitable, especially considering it probably would have cost half as much to make. They could have brought in some new mechanics, new power-ups, new baddies, and environment types, the kind of stuff any new Mario brings to the table with a new set of levels. They could have even made the sequel a little more difficult, knowing that the people returning for more would probably be Mario's core fans versus the little tykes who got the first game with their 3DSs for Christmas and appreciate the low difficulty. Okay, stop yelling at the screen. I know 3D Land technically got a sequel. Super Mario 3D World on the Wii U featured the same basic style, but expanded to fit the hardware and made to support up to 4 players. If you know me, you'll know that I was pretty disappointed with it though. 3D Land's simple nature made sense because it was on a handheld. Carrying that simple nature over to the brand new HD system was a strange move, and while the game was certainly fun, it felt underwhelming to me. And with the exception of a tiny handful of levels, way too easy all over again, which was much harder to forgive on a home console. If 3D World or something like it had made its way to 3DS instead, I would have been ecstatic. But instead, I was left wishing I had more 3D Mario to play on the go. Just a few more weeks. Moving on, Kid Icarus Uprising was something of a surprise. Out of the blue, Nintendo decided to revive a mega old IP that most of us only really knew because they put Pit in Smash Bros. Brawl. Most of Nintendo's classic series saw modernization in the N64 and GameCube eras when making the jump to 3D was just what old games did. But Uprising was a rare thing. We got to see Nintendo reinvent an NES classic in a more advanced era when 3D gaming had already been perfected. And reinvent they did. Kid Icarus might not be a beloved series like Metroid or Mario or whatever, but they treated Uprising as though it were. Masahiro Sakurai himself took a break from working on Smash Bros. And turned the game into something unexpectedly huge. It's split between on-rails air levels, where you use the circle pad and stylus to dart around and take out zillions of enemies, and third-person ground levels where you navigate the world in the style of a more traditional third-person adventure game. It features a ton of customizable weapons and a deep multiplayer mode that I sadly never got a chance to play. Its most notable feature, in my opinion though, is this really intriguing wagering system where you can ramp up the difficulty to any level you want when you start a level, and the higher you make it, the more in-game currency you've got to gain with a victory and lose with a defeat. This is really innovative, and I'm baffled that it hasn't become common in other games. Then to top it all off, the game is packed with humor. The characters talk to each other while you're playing, and they break the fourth wall so frequently that you might as well stop bothering to build it back up. Just as he does with all his games, it's obvious that Sakurai went above and beyond with Kid Icarus Uprising. He put way more love into it than I think anyone expected. And the fact that it's a new potential Nintendo series with loads of unique elements and robust multiplayer is what makes me feel like it should have gotten a sequel. I want to see more of this world. I want to see what else the developers can come up with. Now, out of all the games on this list, this is the only one where I completely understand Nintendo's hesitance in getting a direct sequel rolling. It sold over 1 million units, which is certainly good, though they put so much work into it that I don't know if they considered it a big enough success. And if they did make another one, I'm not 100% confident that it would sell at least as much. But darn it, Uprising is just such a gem of a game that I still want to see them try. An eventual sequel on a non-3DS system isn't technically out of the question, and that would be pretty great, but of course that's going to require building the game all over again for new hardware, whereas a sequel on 3DS would have been the most time and cost effective. Hey, let's just hope that we at least get an HD remaster on Switch or something to drum up interest in the series again. Oh, Luigi's Mansion. One of the best Nintendo series that you can barely call a series because there have only been 2 and they were like 1 million years apart. Number 2 made its way to the 3DS though, and that alone makes the system something special in my book. I adore the original, and Darkmoon is a great follow-up. Just like Super Mario 3D Land, there are some disappointing elements. It has a mission-based structure and sucks you back to home base with annoying frequency rather than just letting you pick your way through the game until you beat it. This does open up replayability considerably, as there's lots of stuff to collect and times to beat and whatnot, plus the levels can change slightly from mission to mission, but it still makes the game less engaging in a way. The ghosts are pretty generic compared to the original slew of unique specters, and while the first boss is phenomenal, the rest just don't live up. The Scarescraper co-op mode had incredible potential, but at least in my opinion, it's squandered by relying entirely on time. Every single mode, the goal is to do what you need to do before time runs out, rather than, just seeing if you and your friends can complete the goal without dying and having actual fun. But also, just like Super Mario 3D Land, those disappointing elements don't mean the game ain't a blast to play. The formula of flashing ghosts and sucking them up was just plain good to begin with. It's part of what made the first game so addictive, and here it's made substantially better with a number of tweaks and changes. Every aspect of hunting down ghosts and searching for treasure has been improved. The world is filled with interesting mechanics to utilize and puzzles to solve and just stuff to do. And you want to talk about a beautiful 3DS game? Oh my gosh! If there's a more gorgeous game on the system, I haven't seen it. Without 3D turned on, it boasts a buttery smooth frame rate, and with 3D, it looks like some complex 3D diorama. The environments are packed with little visual details, and the overall art style is just superb. The animations and character expressions in particular are a cut above most Nintendo games. So why should this game have gotten a sequel? It's all the same reason at this point, you get the picture. I just wanted more. I'll fully admit that Luigi's Mansion isn't exactly fit to see tons of sequels. Each time they've got to come up with some other dastardly thing for King Boo to do, and they've got to create locales that feel fresh. I mean, how many mansions and abandoned factories can there be in the Mushroom Kingdom? But seeing as we've only ever had 2 Luigi's Mansion games total, I don't think it's unreasonable to want a third one 3 or 4 years after Darkmoon. They could reintroduce unique ghosts, maybe do away with missions if we're lucky, and make an even more robust multiplayer campaign. Naturally, I'd love co-op challenges with goals that aren't timed, and I know I'm like obsessed with map editors, but oh man, would it be cool to have a map editor? You could set up a gauntlet of ghosts for your friends to work through. Maybe you could even control the ghosts or actively spawn them, Zombie U King of the Zombies style. Just like Kid Icarus Uprising, we could technically get a sequel in the future on any hardware Nintendo feels like putting it on. The problem with that, though, is that I want it now! Luigi's Mansion just worked so well on the 3DS, especially with that 3D effect, that Luigi's Mansion 3 would have been a perfect addition to the library. Finally, we come to Zelda, and if I had to rank these games by order of sequel deservingness, Link Between Worlds would be number 1. First off, it's just great. Have you played Link Between Worlds? Well, you should, because it's great. I'm a huge fan of top-down or quote-unquote 2D Zelda, but the 2DS titles just did not do it for me. And this was the first plain old non-stylus controlled Zelda in nearly a decade. After that long without getting my top-down fix, I tore into this game like a bulldog on a roast chicken. And the second I finished it, I opened up Hero Mode and did it all over again. The game brought a lot of interesting stuff to the table, most obviously the ability to do most of the dungeons in any order, with an item rental system to help you get around. This gives the game a wonderful sense of freedom. You can just kinda go, and when you find a dungeon, you just kinda do it. Then there's the ability to turn into a painting and leave it to Nintendo to come up with a myriad of clever ways to utilize this ability. In fact, each item is used to its fullest potential. Each one proves useful in so many different situations. Complaints? Well, I enjoy the whole dungeon thing in its own way, and it certainly makes the game more consumable. But the trade-off is that there's no mystery when it comes to items, they're all available to you right from the start, and there's none of that satisfying sense of progression in most Zelda games. Whoa, I found a hammer, now I can break those rocks and get over to that new area, that kind of thing. You just rent what you need until you have enough money to buy it outright. Then the game's a little on the easy side. Okay, well, combat can sometimes be tricky, but the dungeons themselves are really easy to run through without much thought. I'd prefer if there were just a few more good head scratchers thrown in there to keep it interesting. Then I really didn't like how they reused the map from Link to the Past. I know it's supposed to make me feel nostalgic and all that, and it's different enough that it really is its own thing, but it just felt kinda lazy. That and the story had some humongous issues. Mainly, why is there a third version of Hyrule? Are you serious? How many more are there going to be? The thing is, it felt ripe for a sequel. It felt like reusing the Link to the Past map was maybe just a way to speed up development, and that we would for sure be getting a follow-up with a completely new world to explore. They had the engine, the visual assets, the mechanics, they had everything they needed right there on the 3DS. But instead, the only follow-up we got was Triforce Heroes. The game looks fine. I haven't played it, but I was wondering when they'd make a Four Swords style multiplayer Zelda again. It makes a lot of sense on the 3DS. The problem is that multiplayer Zelda offers a very different experience. It appeals to a specific audience of folks who want to play Zelda with their friends, and I'm not one of those people. Or more accurately, I could potentially be one of those people, but I just know that making my friends buy the game and getting together to play is just never gonna happen. I don't want it badly enough. It feels like a huge missed opportunity that this was the only other top-down Zelda to hit the 3DS. And it was especially disappointing after Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks showed up on the same system, the latter being the timely sequel to the former. Once Zelda ditched the stylus controls, I hoped and prayed that the series would receive the same amount of love from Nintendo on the DS's successor. But alas, it didn't. And now we're in this awkward period where Nintendo's trying to figure out what to do with top-down Zelda and how it can coexist with 3D Zelda now that home console and handheld are one and the same. Because that used to be how they separated the two types of Zeldas, 3D on one and 2D on the other. How on earth do you market something like Link Between Worlds when Breath of the Stinkin' Wild is on the same system? That's why the 3DS was probably our last chance for a nice, simple, uncomplicated top-down follow-up. But just like all the games on this list, it isn't to be. The 3DS is still getting some games, but I'm willing to bet we're not going to get any more major games announced for it. At least not any of the sequels I'm talking about. At this point, it makes more sense for Nintendo to focus on the Switch, and hey, that ain't so bad. Super Mario Odyssey is probably going to make 3D Land completely irrelevant, and as for the others, we can continue to dream of the day they announce a new Kid Icarus, or 2D Zelda, or Luigi's Mansion for the Switch. Oh man, guys. Luigi's Mansion for the Switch. Just saying it out loud gives me chills. Wait. Before we go, I've got a killer of a joke. Okay, you ready for this? You know what 3DS game should have gotten a sequel? Federation Force, ha? How about Sticker Star, ha? Or maybe, hey, Pikmin, whoa! It's a joke, sarcasm. Because I made that whole video about how I didn't think it, I don't know, it was a whole thing. Don't worry about it.